The sun hung high in the sky as crowds gathered in the city square for a peaceful protest organized by the Global Humanitarian Alliance. Marcus, a dedicated black man in his early 40s, stood at the forefront, radiating a calm yet powerful presence. His hands held a sign that read, "Equal rights for all," emphasizing the message of unity and justice. Around him, people of all ages and backgrounds filled the square, each one fueled by a shared determination to fight against the injustices faced by marginalized communities. The air was electric with anticipation, and Marcus felt a surge of hope wash over him as he looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar and some new. As speeches echoed around him, he was reminded of the long journey it took to get to this moment. He had spent years advocating for human rights, working tirelessly to bring attention to the struggles of the oppressed. The crowd's excitement felt contagious, reinforcing his belief that change was possible. "Together, we can make a difference," shouted a speaker on stage, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Marcus felt pride swell in his chest. This gathering was a testament to the power of collective voices, a moment where hope met action. But little did they know how quickly things could change. Without warning, a line of police officers appeared at the edge of the square, their faces stern and their intentions unclear. At first, the crowd thought they were there to ensure safety. However, as the officers moved closer, a sense of dread settled over the atmosphere. The officers began to disperse the gathering, pushing through the crowd with an aggressive force that shocked everyone. Marcus, sensing the escalating tension, stepped forward to address the officers. "We are here for peace. We only want to raise awareness," he urged, his voice steady despite the rising chaos around him. But the officers were unmoved, their demeanor cold and indifferent to the peaceful intentions of the protesters. As the crowd's chants began to fade into nervous whispers, the situation took a turn for the worse. One of the officers suddenly shoved Marcus back, causing him to stumble. Gasps erupted from the onlookers, and confusion spread like wildfire. Marcus struggled to regain his balance, the adrenaline pumping through his veins. "Stay back," shouted another officer, drawing a line in front of Marcus as if he were a criminal. The protesters yelled in outrage, their cries calling for justice as the situation spiraled out of control. "This is our right. We are exercising our freedom of speech," one woman shouted, but her words fell on deaf ears. Feeling a mix of anger and disbelief, Marcus looked around at the crowd. Friends and colleagues from the organization stood frozen in shock, desperately trying to intervene. Yet, the officers remained focused on their objective, their heavy boots stomping around him as they advanced on Marcus. As he felt the cold grip of handcuffs around his wrists, Marcus's mind raced. How could this be happening? Here he was, the president of a global humanitarian organization, a leader dedicated to fighting for equality and justice. Instead of being celebrated for his efforts, he was being treated like a common criminal. His heart sank as he realized the irony of the situation. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus exclaimed, his voice shaking with frustration. "I'm fighting for the rights you're violating." But the officers simply glared at him, pushing him towards a police van waiting nearby. The scene was chaotic. Protesters shouted and pleaded for the officers to stop, urging them to recognize Marcus's status and his dedication to human rights. Yet, their voices blended into the background noise of the city, drowned out by the officers' commands. As the police pulled him to his feet, Marcus felt the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He had devoted his life to promoting change, to advocating for those who had been silenced. Yet, here he was being silenced himself. Amid the chaos, he caught glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd, colleagues who had joined him in the fight for justice. Their expressions mirrored his disbelief, and he could see the frustration and helplessness etched into their features. The police officers shoved him into the van, slamming the door behind him. The reality of the moment hit him like a punch to the gut. He was being arrested for standing up for what he believed in, for leading a movement toward a more just world. As the van pulled away, he glanced out the small window, catching the eyes of his supporters, who were left behind, shouting his name. "Stay strong," one of them yelled, her voice rising above the crowd. Marcus felt a flicker of hope amidst the despair. He would not let this moment define him. He would fight back. As the police van rattled down the streets, Marcus felt a storm of emotions brewing inside him. Disbelief, anger, and frustration swirled together, threatening to overwhelm him. He gazed out the barred window, watching the familiar sights of the city transform into blurred memories. Each turn of the van felt like a betrayal, a harsh reminder of how quickly the world could turn upside down. In the cramped space of the van, Marcus's mind raced. He thought of his colleagues, who were probably frantic with worry. He imagined their faces, filled with concern as they tried to figure out how to help him. His thoughts drifted to his mission, the countless lives he had touched through the Global Humanitarian Alliance. He had dedicated his life to fighting for justice, but now he was being treated like a common criminal. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus couldn't help but ask the officer sitting beside him. The man remained silent, eyes fixed forward, ignoring Marcus's presence. This indifference only fueled his frustration. "You don't understand what I represent to you," he pressed, but the officer remained unresponsive. As they pulled into the precinct, Marcus's heart raced. The van stopped, and the sound of doors slamming echoed around him. He was quickly escorted out by two officers, their grips tight around his arms. "Stay quiet, and this will go smoothly," one of them said, the condescension in his voice unmistakable. Marcus walked through the precinct, his head held high despite the circumstances. The bright lights overhead felt harsh, and the murmurs of officers filled the air. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was all a misunderstanding that could easily be cleared up. He had influential friends, connections that could vouch for his character and work. But he also knew that the longer he was treated as a suspect, the more complicated things would become. Inside the booking area, Marcus was placed in a holding cell, the heavy door clanging shut behind him. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. The stark white walls felt suffocating, and the sound of other detainees filled the air, a mixture of despair and anger. He looked around, taking in the faces of those who had also been caught in the crossfire of injustice. "Hey, man, what are you in for?" a young man called out from the adjacent cell. Marcus turned to him, recognizing the pain and confusion reflected in his eyes. "Just a peaceful protest," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the situation. "They think I'm causing trouble." "Peaceful protest? You and me both, brother," the young man said, shaking his head. "They don't get it, do they?" Marcus felt a sense of camaraderie in that moment. They were all victims of a system that seemed designed to punish rather than protect. Hours passed, and Marcus's thoughts drifted to his organization. They had been planning this protest for months, a culmination of hard work and dedication to a cause larger than themselves. How could the police misconstrue their peaceful intentions? The very act of standing up for human rights should never have led to violence. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. An officer approached the cell, keyring in hand. "Time to go," he said bluntly, unlocking the door. Marcus's heart raced again. Was this the moment he'd been waiting for? He stood up, ready to defend himself if necessary. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice firm. "You'll see," the officer replied, a smirk playing on his lips. Marcus was escorted out of the holding area and into a small, dimly lit interrogation room. The officer gestured for him to sit at a metal table, and Marcus complied, his hands clenched into fists on the surface. A moment later, another officer entered, this one wearing a badge that read detective. "I'm Detective Jacobs," he introduced himself, his tone professional but lacking warmth. Let's get this over with. I need your side of the story." As he began to ask questions, Marcus felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The detective seemed disinterested in the truth, focusing more on getting a confession than understanding the context of what had happened. "So, you were leading this protest? What was your intent?" he probed. Marcus took a deep breath, determined to remain composed. "My intent was to advocate for human rights. We were not causing any harm, only seeking justice." He explained the purpose of the protest, the positive message behind it, and how it was meant to bring awareness to systemic issues. Detective Jacobs leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "You expect us to believe that you were just there for a good time? We have reports of violence. People were harmed by the police, not by us," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "We were exercising our right to free speech. How can you ignore that?" The detective remained silent, his eyes narrowing as he considered Marcus's words. The tension in the room thickened, and Marcus felt an overwhelming urge to fight for his truth. He knew he had to stay strong. This was just the beginning of a long battle ahead. As the interrogation dragged on, Marcus could feel his resolve beginning to waver. Each question felt like a personal attack, aimed at dismantling his identity as a leader and advocate for human rights. Detective Jacobs pressed him for details, attempting to frame the peaceful protest as a violent uprising. "What do you say to the claims that your protest turned chaotic?" Jacobs asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "We were not violent," Marcus insisted, his tone unwavering. "Our message was about peace and unity. We had no intention of causing chaos." He could feel the tension rising within him, but he refused to let it consume him. As the detective continued his line of questioning, Marcus's mind drifted to the people who had gathered in support of his organization. He could picture their worried faces, the looks of disbelief when they heard he had been arrested. They would be trying to rally support to get him out of here. They knew him, trusted him, and believed in the cause they all fought for together. The detective leaned in closer, an unsettling intensity in his gaze. "You realize that your position makes you a target, don't you? Your organization has drawn attention, and not all of it is positive." "I'm not afraid of scrutiny," Marcus replied, holding Jacobs's gaze. "What we stand for is more important than any threats we might face." With each word, he felt the fire within him reignite. He remembered the countless individuals who had reached out to him for help, the stories of hardship that fueled his passion. They needed him to stand strong, to fight back against the injustices that plagued their lives. "Do you really think this is going to end well for you?" Jacobs asked, a hint of amusement creeping into his voice. "You're in a tough spot, and the higher-ups are not going to take kindly to a protest that disrupts the status quo. The truth will come out," Marcus said firmly, refusing to back down. "I won't let this moment define me or the work we've done." After what felt like an eternity, the detective finally stood up. "We'll see how that plays out. For now, you'll be held in custody until we can determine your next steps." With that, he walked out, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. Back in the holding cell, the weight of the world settled on Marcus's shoulders. He felt helpless, trapped in a system designed to silence him. It was a stark reminder of the reality many face daily, being marginalized and overlooked simply for standing up against oppression. Time passed slowly, and the sounds of the precinct echoed in the background. The clanging of doors, the muffled voices of officers, and the cries of those around him blurred into a cacophony that drowned out his thoughts. After what felt like hours, an officer appeared at the door, his expression unreadable. "You're being released," he said flatly. Marcus's heart raced with a mix of relief and apprehension. "But you need to stay available for questioning. Don't leave town." "What about my belongings?" Marcus asked, realizing he had left everything behind at the protest. "You'll get them back later. For now, just sign here," the officer replied, gesturing toward a clipboard. with a heavy heart. Marcus complied, feeling the weight of the situation still looming over him. As he stepped out of the precinct, the sunlight hit him like a warm embrace. The fresh air filled his lungs, and for a brief moment he felt free. But the thought of what awaited him outside was overwhelming. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he quickly pulled it out. A flood of messages from colleagues and friends filled the screen, each one expressing concern and support. "We're here for you, Marcus," read one. "We're fighting back," read another. The outpouring of love and solidarity gave him strength. However, he knew this was just the beginning. The fight for justice would continue, not only for himself but for those who depended on him. He had to return to his organization, regroup, and prepare for the battle ahead. Marcus walked towards the headquarters of the Global Humanitarian Alliance, determination etched into every step. He needed to ensure that their message remained strong, that their fight for human rights wouldn't be silenced by fear or oppression. As he approached the building, familiar faces emerged from the crowd. His colleagues gathered around him, relief washing over them as they saw he was safe. "Marcus, we were so worried," one woman exclaimed, pulling him into a tight embrace. "We heard what happened," another added, anger evident in her voice. "This isn't right." "I know," Marcus replied, his voice steady, "but we can't back down. We need to stand together now more than ever." The group nodded, their expressions resolute. They knew the challenges ahead would be daunting, but together they would face whatever came their way. Inside the building, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. They began to strategize, discussing how to use the incident to further their mission. "This is a turning point for us," Marcus declared, looking around at the faces of those who shared his vision. "We can't let them silence our voices. We must fight for change." With each passing moment, the fire within him grew stronger. He would not let this moment define him or the movement they had built. Together, they would rise, united against the tide of injustice, ready to make their voices heard. The atmosphere in the headquarters of the Global Humanitarian Alliance was charged with energy as Marcus addressed his team. The recent events had ignited a fire within them, transforming their shock and anger into a powerful determination to push forward. They gathered around a large table, a diverse group united by a common cause, eager to strategize the next steps. "First and foremost, we need to get our story out there," Marcus began, his voice steady and commanding. "The public needs to know what happened to me and why we were protesting in the first place. We can't allow the narrative to be twisted by those in power." One of the younger team members, Sarah, nodded enthusiastically. "We should organize a press conference, get the media involved, and share our side of the story. The more people know, the harder it will be for them to dismiss us." Marcus smiled, appreciating the fervor in her voice. "Exactly. We need to emphasize that we were there for a peaceful protest and that the police resorted to violence against innocent people. We have to make it clear that this isn't just about me. It's about all of us and the systemic issues we're fighting against." As they discussed logistics, Marcus felt a swell of pride for his team. They had worked tirelessly for years, advocating for human rights and social justice. This was not just an organization to him. It was a family, a group of passionate individuals willing to sacrifice their comfort for the greater good. Another team member, James, brought up a critical point. "What about legal support? We need to ensure that we're protected and that we can counter any backlash from the police. They might try to discredit us or intimidate us further." "Agreed," Marcus replied, already thinking of the legal connections he had built over the years. "I'll reach out to our legal advisors. We need a solid strategy in place to defend ourselves if necessary. I won't let them paint us as the villains in this story." With a plan forming, they began to assign roles for the press conference. Each member took on a task, from drafting statements to preparing media kits. The energy in the room was palpable. They were transforming their frustration into action. As they worked late into the night, Marcus felt the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. But he also felt an unshakable resolve. They would not be silenced. This was a chance to shine a light on the issues they had fought against for so long, a moment to inspire others to join their cause. When the night finally came to a close, Marcus stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. The crisp night breeze wrapped around him, and he looked up at the stars, feeling a connection to something greater than himself. He remembered the countless individuals he had met throughout his journey, those who had shared their stories of injustice and resilience. Whatever it takes, I won't let them down, he murmured to himself, the weight of their hopes resting on his shoulders. The following morning, they held the press conference in a spacious auditorium filled with reporters eager to cover the latest story. The room buzzed with anticipation, and as Marcus stepped up to the podium, he felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice steady but passionate. "I stand before you not just as a victim of police violence, but as a representative of a movement dedicated to fighting for human rights." As he spoke, he recounted the events of the protest, the peaceful gathering, the messages of hope, and the shocking violence they faced at the hands of the police. He highlighted the systemic issues that plague society, urging the public to recognize that this was not just about one man, but about a larger struggle for justice. Every day, people across this country face discrimination and violence simply for standing up for their rights. It is time for us to unite against this injustice and demand accountability from those sworn to protect us, Marcus declared, his voice rising with conviction. He could see the eyes of the audience widening, their interest piqued by his passion. This was a pivotal moment, and he had their attention. We need to challenge the status quo and create a society where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Together, we can make a difference. As he finished his speech, the applause erupted around him, a wave of support that filled the room with hope. The press clamored to ask questions, eager to delve deeper into the issues he had raised. Throughout the Q&A session, Marcus felt empowered, each question reinforcing the importance of their mission. He was no longer just a victim. He was a voice for the voiceless, a champion for change. As the conference concluded, Marcus stepped down from the podium, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He glanced at his team, who were beaming with pride. They had taken a stand, and now the world was watching. But he knew this was just the beginning. The fight ahead would be challenging, but with the support of his team and the public, he was ready to face whatever obstacles lay ahead. They would continue to push for justice, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what he had faced. The press conference had ignited a spark, but it also drew the ire of those who preferred to maintain the status quo. Within hours, headlines began to circulate, not only about Marcus's arrest, but also about the protests that had erupted across the city in response. While many stood in solidarity with him, others were quick to condemn the movement as disruptive and violent. In the following days, Marcus noticed an increasing police presence around the headquarters of the Global Humanitarian Alliance. Officers patrolled the area more frequently, their eyes watching every gathering with scrutiny. It felt like a looming shadow, a reminder that the fight for justice came with risks. At the office, the mood was a mix of determination and anxiety. The team gathered for a meeting, discussing their next steps. "We can't let the backlash intimidate us," Marcus said, addressing his colleagues. "This is exactly what they want, to silence us. We have to be louder than ever." Sarah raised her hand, her expression serious. "But we also need to be careful. There are people out there who want to discredit us. We need to protect ourselves and ensure our voices aren't drowned out." Marcus nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. "You're right. We need to develop a strategy that not only pushes our message, but also safeguards our team. We should increase our social media presence and engage with supporters online to keep the momentum going." As they discussed tactics, Marcus felt a knot tightening in his stomach. He knew that pushing forward came with risks, and the weight of that responsibility bore down on him. But there was no turning back. He had already committed to this fight. Just then, a knock on the door interrupted their conversation. An unfamiliar face appeared, a journalist from a reputable news outlet. "I'm here to speak with Marcus," she said, her tone professional but firm. "Sure, come in," Marcus replied, gesturing for her to enter. Once settled, the journalist wasted no time. "Marcus, I've been following your story closely. There are claims that your organization is inciting violence, and I'd like to get your perspective on that." Marcus took a deep breath, the weight of the question pressing down on him. "Our organization has always advocated for peace and unity. The violence you mentioned was initiated by the police, not us. We are calling for accountability and justice, and we will not be silenced." The journalist nodded, scribbling notes as he spoke. "There are also rumors that some officials are looking to take legal action against you for the protest. How do you plan to respond?" "We'll fight back," he replied confidently. "We have legal support, and we're prepared to defend ourselves. We won't let fear dictate our actions. This is about more than just me. It's about creating change in our society." As the interview continued, Marcus felt a sense of purpose fueling his words. He had a platform, and he was determined to use it to amplify the voices of those who felt powerless. After the journalists left, the team gathered once more, discussing the coverage and planning for the next phase of their campaign. Days turned into weeks, and the tension continued to build. Online, they gained followers and supporters, and their message resonated with many. Yet, the police presence remained heavy, and incidents of harassment began to escalate. One evening, as Marcus left the office late, he noticed a patrol car parked across the street. The officers inside seemed to be watching him, their expressions unreadable. He quickened his pace, a sense of unease creeping in. Arriving home, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being targeted. The safety of his team weighed on his mind. As he settled into bed, he knew that while they were fighting for a noble cause, they were also risking everything. The next day, a shocking video surfaced online. It showed a group of officers violently arresting a peaceful protester during a demonstration, and the footage quickly went viral. Outrage erupted on social media, with calls for justice echoing across platforms. Marcus knew they had to seize this moment to further their cause. "Look at the response to this video," he said during a team meeting, excitement bubbling within him. "This is our chance to remind everyone why we're fighting. We need to respond quickly, stand in solidarity with this individual, and demand accountability for police brutality." With the team's agreement, they organized a rally to support the arrested protester and to continue calling for reform. Flyers were distributed, social media campaigns launched, and volunteers mobilized. The energy in the office was electric as they prepared for the upcoming event. On the day of the rally, the streets were filled with supporters holding signs that read "Justice for All" and "End Police Brutality." The atmosphere was charged with hope and determination, and Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose as he addressed the crowd. "We stand here today not just for one person, but for all those who have faced injustice at the hands of those who are meant to protect us," he declared, his voice rising above the cheers of the crowd. "Together, we will demand change." As the rally gained momentum, it became clear that their message was resonating. But as the crowd grew, so did the police presence, standing ominously at the edges, ready to intervene. Marcus knew that they were walking a fine line between peaceful protest and potential confrontation, but he was determined to remain focused on their mission. With each chant, each sign raised, the crowd felt more united than ever. They were no longer just voices in the shadows. They were a powerful force demanding to be heard. The rally had been a powerful demonstration of unity, and the air buzzed with energy as Marcus and his team concluded their speeches. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. As the crowd began to disperse, the police presence intensified, forming a line along the perimeter, their expressions cold and watchful. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew that any moment could escalate into chaos. "Stay alert, everyone," he cautioned, scanning the crowd and the officers standing ready. "Let's keep the energy positive and peaceful." Just then, a young protester, filled with righteous anger, pushed toward the police line shouting, "You can't silence us. We're fighting for our rights." "Let's not provoke them," Marcus called out, stepping forward. "We're here for change, not confrontation." He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder, urging him to return to the group. Despite his efforts, the tension in the air was palpable. The police seemed to tighten their grip, as if preparing for something to unfold. Marcus felt the weight of the moment, knowing that they had come too far to allow fear to dictate their actions. Then, without warning, an officer stepped forward, barking orders. "Disperse now. You're violating the law." A murmur rippled through the crowd as confusion and frustration bubbled to the surface. Marcus raised his voice, trying to restore calm. "We are peacefully protesting, and we have every right to be here. This is about justice and equality." But the officers seemed unmoved, stepping closer and gesturing for the crowd to back away. The tension escalated, and Marcus sensed the crowd's anxiety rising. "We're not leaving," someone shouted, emboldened by their shared purpose. In an instant, chaos erupted. Officers surged forward, shoving people back, and the crowd began to panic. Marcus's heart raced as he saw the situation spiraling out of control. "Stay together," he shouted, trying to keep everyone unified amid the chaos. He quickly turned to his team. "We need to form a barrier, protect each other." They linked arms, creating a wall of solidarity. Marcus could feel the adrenaline coursing through him as he faced the advancing officers. "Enough of this!" an officer shouted, and without warning, he lunged toward Marcus, grabbing his arm. "You need to leave now. Get your hands off him," one of Marcus's team members shouted, rushing forward to intervene. The officer's grip tightened, and the chaos around them intensified as more officers joined in, pushing people back and arresting those who resisted. In that moment, everything blurred. Marcus felt the adrenaline surge as he fought to keep his footing. He could hear the cries of his supporters, the chants of justice, echoing in the air, but it felt like they were being drowned out by the overwhelming noise of chaos. Suddenly, a flash of recognition crossed the officer's face as he processed Marcus's identity. "Wait a minute," he stammered, hesitating as he glanced at his colleagues. "This is the guy from the news." But it was too late. The situation had escalated beyond reason, and the other officers continued their aggressive tactics. Marcus felt a surge of anger. They couldn't allow their message to be lost amid the chaos. "Stop," he shouted, forcing his voice above the fray. "We're here for change, not violence." But the officers didn't listen. A struggle ensued as Marcus fought against their grasp, his heart pounding with fear for his team and himself. He caught glimpses of his colleagues, equally distressed as they stood firm, determined to resist the onslaught. "Stay strong," he called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We're in this together." As the confrontation escalated, Marcus felt a surge of energy rise within him. He had to protect his team and ensure their message was not lost. The world was watching. He could not let them down. With one final push, Marcus broke free from the officer's grip, stepping forward to address the crowd again. "Listen to me," he shouted, raising his hands in a gesture of calm. "We are not the enemy. We are fighting for our rights." The crowd responded, rallying behind him, their voices united. "Justice, justice," they chanted, drowning out the officers. In that moment, a shift occurred. The officers paused, uncertain, as the crowd grew more resolute. Marcus could see the fear in their eyes as they realized they were facing a force much larger than themselves. Then, unexpectedly, a senior officer stepped forward, his expression grim. "Stand down," he ordered his team. "Let them be." The tension in the air shifted as the officers hesitated, then began to withdraw, forming a line but no longer advancing. Marcus felt the weight lift from his shoulders as he looked around at his supporters. "We did it," he shouted, a wave of relief washing over him. The crowd erupted into cheers, their spirits renewed. They had faced adversity and emerged stronger, their message clearer than ever. Marcus knew this moment would resonate, fueling their fight for justice as they continued to stand together. The aftermath of the protest was a whirlwind of emotions. The crowd had dispersed, but the energy from the rally lingered in the air. As Marcus returned to the office the next day, he was met with a mixture of excitement and trepidation from his team. They had stood their ground, but the fear of retaliation loomed large. "Did you see the news?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and exhilaration. "We're trending everywhere. People are sharing videos of what happened." Marcus nodded, feeling a surge of pride in their resilience. "It shows that our message is reaching people, but we need to be cautious. The police might retaliate against us after what happened." As they discussed their strategy moving forward, the phone rang, cutting through the tension. Marcus answered, recognizing the voice of a prominent activist who had been following their journey. "Marcus, I've been hearing about the protest and the police's aggressive response. We need to amplify your story. This isn't just about you. It's about everyone fighting against injustice," the activist urged. "Absolutely," Marcus replied. "We want to ensure our message of peace and justice resonates across the country. We can't let this be swept under the rug." They began to outline plans for a national campaign aimed at rallying support for their cause. They would focus on the stories of those who had faced police brutality, sharing personal testimonies to highlight the urgency of the issue. With each passing day, the momentum grew. Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose, fueled by the support of activists, community leaders, and ordinary citizens. Their mission was clear: to demand accountability and reform within the police force. But as they pushed forward, threats began to surface. A few members of the police department started circulating negative stories about Marcus and the organization, attempting to discredit their efforts. In one meeting, a team member raised their concerns. "We're facing a smear campaign. They're trying to paint us as the bad guys, to make it seem like we're inciting violence rather than calling for justice." Marcus felt the weight of their struggle. "We need to be transparent. Let's share our mission, our values, and the truth behind our actions. We have nothing to hide." They quickly launched a counter-campaign, sharing their story and focusing on the positive changes they wanted to see in their community. They released videos, interviews, and articles detailing their mission and values. The more they shared, the more support they received. As the movement gained traction, Marcus received a call that changed everything. It was a legal representative from a major civil rights organization offering their support. "We've seen what you're doing, and we want to help," the lawyer said. "We can provide legal counsel and help you navigate the challenges ahead." With this newfound support, Marcus felt a wave of relief. They could now focus on their mission without the constant worry of legal battles overshadowing their work. The days turned into weeks, and the campaign gained visibility. They organized more rallies, attended community events, and collaborated with other organizations to expand their reach. The public outcry for change grew louder, and more people began to join their movement. One evening, as Marcus prepared to leave the office, he reflected on how far they had come. The journey had been challenging, but it had also united countless individuals fighting for justice. Just as he was about to step outside, Sarah rushed in, her face flushed with excitement. "You won't believe this." We just got a call from a major news network. They want to feature our story in a segment on police reform. Marcus's heart raced at the news. This is incredible. We need to seize this opportunity to share our message on a larger platform. As the team prepared for the interview, Marcus felt a mix of anticipation and nerves. This was their chance to reach an even wider audience, to advocate for the change they so desperately sought. On the day of the interview, the studio buzzed with activity. Marcus stood in front of the cameras, ready to speak on behalf of the countless individuals who had faced injustice. The host welcomed him, and the conversation began. Marcus, tell us about the movement you're leading and why it's so important, the host prompted. With conviction in his voice, Marcus began to share their story. This movement is about more than just one protest. It's about standing up against a system that has failed us for too long. We demand accountability, transparency, and real change within our law enforcement agencies. As he spoke, he could see the impact of his words. The host nodded along, clearly engaged, and the camera captured the passion in Marcus's expression. Together, we can build a society where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, he concluded, feeling a sense of hope wash over him. The interview marked a turning point for Marcus and the movement. The stories shared resonated with viewers, igniting conversations about police reform and systemic change. The outpouring of support from the community fueled their mission, making them more determined than ever to continue the fight. As the sun rose on the day of the long-anticipated press conference, Marcus felt a wave of excitement and anxiety wash over him. This was a moment they had been working toward. A chance to share their mission with the world, to advocate for change and hold those in power accountable. The venue was packed with reporters, community members, and supporters, all eager to hear what Marcus had to say. The atmosphere was electric, a palpable energy that resonated in the air. Marcus stood backstage, taking a deep breath as he prepared himself mentally. He knew the stakes were high. This was an opportunity to turn the tide in their fight against police brutality. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, her eyes filled with encouragement. Marcus nodded, his resolve solidifying. "Let's do this." As he stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinded him, but he quickly focused on the faces in the crowd. He could see the hope in their eyes, the belief that change was possible. "Thank you all for being here today," Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. "Today is not just about me or our organization. It's about every single person who has suffered from injustice, who has been silenced when they should have been heard." He paused, letting his words sink in. What happened to me during that protest was not an isolated incident. It is part of a larger pattern of systemic racism and violence that must end. We stand here today, united, to demand accountability and reform. The audience erupted into applause, their energy fueling Marcus's conviction. He continued, sharing stories of individuals who had faced similar situations, emphasizing the need for change within law enforcement. "We must ensure that those who protect us are held to the highest standards of integrity and accountability. It is time for the people to reclaim their rights." As he spoke, the cameras flashed, capturing every moment. Marcus felt empowered, channeling the energy of the crowd into his message. "Together, we will not be silenced. We will continue to advocate for justice until we see real change." Just then, a reporter raised their hand, interrupting. "Marcus, how do you respond to those who say that your protests are disruptive and incite violence?" Marcus took a deep breath, ready for this question. "Our protests are peaceful, and our message is clear. We are fighting for justice, not violence. We want a society where everyone can feel safe and respected. Disruption is a necessary step when our voices have been ignored for too long." The audience erupted into cheers, affirming his stance. The energy in the room surged, and Marcus felt a wave of hope wash over him. He was not alone in this fight. They were all in it together. As the press conference continued, Marcus addressed various issues, including police training, community relations, and the need for comprehensive reform. He emphasized the importance of dialogue and collaboration between law enforcement and the communities they serve. In closing, Marcus said, "This is just the beginning. We will continue to stand up, speak out, and fight for what is right. Change is possible, and together, we will make it happen." The applause that followed was deafening. As he stepped down from the stage, Marcus felt a sense of fulfillment and purpose. They had made their voices heard, and now it was time to push forward with their mission. The following days brought a wave of support. News outlets covered the press conference, and their campaign gained national attention. Marcus received messages from individuals across the country, sharing their stories and expressing solidarity. The police department was under immense pressure to respond to the public outcry. As investigations into the officers' actions began, Marcus felt a renewed sense of hope. This was a turning point, not just for him, but for countless others who had been affected by police violence. In the midst of the turmoil, Marcus found solace in the support of his team. They gathered frequently to strategize, share updates, and celebrate their successes. It was a reminder that they were not just fighting for themselves, but for a brighter future for all. One evening, while reflecting on the journey, Marcus received a call from the activist who had initially reached out to him. "Marcus, we want to honor you and your team for your bravery and dedication to this cause. We believe your story can inspire others to take a stand." Overwhelmed with gratitude, Marcus replied, "Thank you, but this is a collective effort. We are all in this together." As the days turned into weeks, the movement continued to grow, fueled by the passion and determination of those involved. Marcus felt an unwavering commitment to the cause, knowing that their work was making a difference. Finally, on the one-year anniversary of the protests, they organized a large rally in the heart of the city. Thousands gathered to celebrate their achievements and reaffirm their commitment to justice. As Marcus stood before the crowd, he felt a sense of pride wash over him. This is not just a celebration of what we've accomplished. It's a reminder of the work that still lies ahead, he declared, his voice carrying across the sea of faces. "We will not stop until justice is served and every voice is heard." The crowd erupted into cheers, their unity a powerful testament to their journey. Marcus knew that together, they could create lasting change and build a future where justice and equality reigned. As he looked out at the faces of those who had joined him in this fight, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was just the beginning. Together, they would continue to push for a world that reflected their values of justice, dignity, and respect for all.